some other people will come in, maybe not. I think this is probably our core crew. Very excited to dig in today with you all. The focus is, community engagement is something that project developers think about, talk about, are required to do, but what does that mean and how do we take that beyond a community benefits agreement, which is typically, what we do or what the industry does. Brief introduction, my name is Charlotte Parker. I'm Director of Community Engagement at Dimension Energy. Morning. If you can sit in the middle, we're gonna keep everything concentrated for maximum discussion. I started my career as a journalist and then as a teacher, so have always been very focused on the human and kind of grassroots side of things. Worked at Acumen, a nonprofit impact investor, for a few years before business school, and that really made me think about how you can use business to create impact at scale. So after SOM, knew I wanted to be working at a for-profit company, but focused on how do you use what that company is doing and the scale of that company and its resources to bring clean energy and other economic benefits to more people. So that's a little about me. I will switch over to our slides here. Since we're a small group, can we just do name, whether you're a student or you're out in the work world? It'd be great to hear where you work. We can keep it really brief. I'll start with you, my first victim.
Hey, I'm Henry. I am in the joint master's program here between the business school and the School of the Environment. My background was kind of generalist business. I worked at the New York Times doing strategy and then Google, and then worked at a climate startup within Google. And so moving towards climate entrepreneurship.
Awesome.
I'm Spencer. I'm actually also in the joint degree between the MBA and the School of the Environment. Background is in transportation electrification policy.
Hi, Scott. YCEC alum, forestry alum, I have to say it that way. And I work for EDF Renewables now as a developer.
Awesome.
Hey everyone, I'm Julie. I'm at the School of the Environment second year, so we'd be graduating next May, and really interested in renewable energy, kind of accelerating the move to a cleaner future. And my background is in energy options.
Hi folks, I'm Drew. I'm a second year student at SOM. I'm interested in business development, internal strategy work in the energy space, and I was doing the same thing but at NASA headquarters before school.
I'm Elizabeth Cook. I'm currently in the industry. I've been working for the electric utility industry for the last 20 years. My current role is overseeing and supporting the strategy around grid modernization for an organization called YCEC. Associated as an illuminating companies, it's a representation of 185 utilities, senior level executives that come together to discuss all things grid transformation. And prior to this role, I won, I guess I'm still part of a couple grant applications where we won funding from the DOE, and a lot of the requirements are the community engagement. So it's a new space for us utilities to really approach and think about holistically.
Great.
I'm Diane Lentakis. I volunteer for like 3 organizations, Sierra Club being one of them, Climate Reality and Connecticut Environmental Rights Amendment. And I do basically outreach for all 3 of the organizations. I'm based in Milford, but the organizations are nationwide. And the one request I have is that people don't talk in acronyms. We're very good at spelling them out. Thank you. It's more helpful if you can spell it out.
No alphabet soup. We'll do full
Thanks.
full words. Go for it. Let's go you over there.
My name's Ryan. I'm a first-year student here at SOM. And my background, I was in management consulting, and then for the last 3 years I was producing an NPR show. So also media production background.
Hi everyone, I'm James. I live in New Haven. I'm a Yale alum. I work for a workforce development board in Connecticut. We manage a Department of Labor grant for a training program in clean energy and utilities.
Awesome.
Matthew Larson. I am new to the public utilities space. I just joined Eversource Energy, supporting their transmission organization as a communication specialist.
Wow, this is such a great room of people to have this conversation. I am thrilled. Couldn't have asked for a better range of experiences and backgrounds. So let's get into it. So a couple words that come to mind when you think of community engagement. Feel free to shout them out. Words, ideas, things that you've heard.
Well, the communities have groups that actually work together for their community.
Yeah.
Something that took 20 years to learn.
Yeah. Okay, groups, communities working together, education. What else? Perceptions of community engagement.
It's really hard.
Thank you. I agree. Good morning. Wow, we're trying to keep everyone sitting in the middle, just if you are able to accommodate that, to keep the conversation going. Thank you. Cool. A couple other ideas, thoughts around what community engagement is or could be or should be or sometimes isn't.
Understanding all the relevant stakeholders.
Great. Yeah. Who all is involved?
Potentially some pushback in communities.
Yes, definitely. We'll talk about that. Great.
Listening to people.
Listening. Number one. Yes. I think that's a great one to continue on with. So what I'm hoping we'll cover in the next hour, a little bit less, just a little bit about Dimension, where I work, what we're doing on the community engagement front to give us some things to respond to. Honestly, I'd love your feedback. I'm 16 months into the job and it's been humbling. It's been hard and interesting and fun and humbling. So there's a lot more to learn. I think everyone is figuring out what this means and what it can look like and what to do with all the federal and state funds that are there to support and require community engagement. But there's, again, a lot to learn. We'll discuss inherent tensions in this space. That's something that has already come up. Good morning. Y'all can bring it in as close to the center as possible. That'll keep us close. And then I have a prompt and sort of discussion point that we'll try to spend the last 10 minutes, 15 minutes talking through, which is a case study around supplier diversity. And then we'll close out with any questions. But I think since we're a small group, if you have questions as we go, feel free to raise a hand and I can answer them to the best of my ability right away. Okay, lots of text on this slide, but I wanted you to know who I work for and just the context here. So Dimension Energy is a national community solar developer, owner, and operator. We're backed by a Swiss private equity group, and I share this because that determines, sort of the bounds that I have to work with for community engagement. We're not working with concessionary capital. We are private equity backed, so I have to make sure there's economic rationale for everything that I do. We have deployed over $400 million into clean energy projects, all community solar, since 2018, and we plan to invest over $3 billion more over the next 5 years. So big pipelines, big goals. We're across states across the country that have strong community solar programs, and actually a big part of our model is encouraging the opening of new community solar markets. I'll get into that in a little bit. New York, California, Virginia, Maine, spend a lot of time in New Jersey, in part because of their state program. And now we're doing a lot in Illinois specifically. Importantly to this community engagement piece, we have around 12,500 customers who are receiving clean energy credits and discounts on their bills from our projects, and more than 10,000 of those are low-income customers. That's a big part of what I focus on. We can talk about that more. And as part of this business model, and the reason Dimension hired me was to make sure that we're grounding our work in partnerships with community-based organizations, municipalities, workforce organizations, to make sure that we're localizing the benefits of our projects. For those of you who aren't familiar with community solar, I wanted to give a quick overview of what it is. You can think of it as a farm share for clean energy is one way I've heard it described that seems to resonate with Yale audiences. Our farms convert sunlight into electricity. We deliver that to the grid, so we're working with investor-owned utilities, and we receive solar credits in return. Local customers join our farms and get a share of those credits, and we keep the balance of those credits to cover the cost of the solar farm, deliver returns to our investors, et cetera. Good morning. Typically, the credits that we pass along to customers are in the range of 10 to 20%. We actually have some projects in New Jersey where the floor was 20% that have a higher discount. So we're going up to 30, even 40% on some of those projects where the project economics can support it. And finally, customers, this is the best part, but it's sort of the too good to be true thing that we get. It's like the albatross of my job. is customers keep receiving energy from their same supplier. There's a credit line on their bill, and every month the amount they have to pay is less. So financial benefits of clean energy, no panels on their roof. It's a great solution for renters, especially folks in low income or affordable housing. Great solution for not renters and homeowners who don't want to put panels on their home. So that's what we're working with. This is sort of what I have to play with for community engagement purposes. So at Dimension, these are the levers that I think about and that we as a company think about for community engagement. So the first one I mentioned earlier, regulation. So we have a strong policy team who's out there all over the country trying to drive policy that will serve us as a business, but also make sure we're delivering the most possible benefits to low-income communities and communities that otherwise have been left out of the clean energy transition. So one accomplishment of this team that I'm thinking of is in New Jersey, there was a pilot community solar program in 2018. That program rolled out. We have 8 projects operating under that program. It wasn't consolidated billing. So customers actually received 2 bills, one that represented the value of their credits and one that represented their existing utility bill. Ultimately, they were paying less, but even just describing it, I see some blank stares. If you're receiving 2 bills, you are expecting that you're paying more. So we had a ton of churn on those projects because people didn't understand what they had signed up for, bad customer experience, not a good look. So our policy team pushed at the state level to get consolidated billing in place, and the utilities are on the hook for that consolidated billing starting in January with the bigger program. Another lever we have, and I love working with this team, is siting and leasing. So we have a real estate team who's out there driving around the country. I have one colleague who I think spends more time in his car than anywhere else, knocking on doors, getting to know local landowners typically. In most of our markets, we are siting on small parcels, about 20 acres. So the pitch there for landowners is, you might have land that you have to fallow. Why don't you let it fallow and receive a lease income for 20 years? Or, in parts of the Central Valley, that's land that in California, that's land that won't be productive anymore because of climate change. So it's sort of a process of education, understanding landowners' needs and interests, and working with them to provide these terms that provide them that additional income. I love hearing from that team because the messaging, the way they describe community solar is very different than how I'm typically describing it, or the terms around equity and energy justice that I might be using with a more urban or East Coast, West Coast audience in the middle of the country. They're really talking about the financial benefits or the generational benefits to the folks who we're leasing from. Permitting, I am sort of going to gloss over this one because our development team really leads on this, and that's where I think it comes down to making sure your team has a shared vision of what community engagement looks like, but dealing with folks with respect, presenting things in a non-confrontational way at permitting meetings, rolling with the punches. Sometimes those meetings get pretty heated. Listening to community preferences, and this is the team that provides community benefit agreements. So that might be a standard tool in the community engagement toolkit. I actually don't typically work with those because I'm more focused on these 3 bottom pieces of the pie. So 3 other levers we have for community engagement: intentional supplier contracting. Liz, I think you mentioned this. Now there's so many programs at the state level out there requiring that utilities and clean energy providers are working with minority-owned businesses, small businesses, you name it, and creating value, economic value in that way. So we're thinking more and more about this. On the construction side, James, we're thinking a lot about workforce development and how we can use our projects as a first job for people who are new to this industry. Then the question is, what budget can we allocate to develop trainings and real pathways to entry into this industry for people who've never seen a solar panel before. And then finally, and this is my favorite bucket, it's unique to community solar maybe in the clean energy industry, but a big part of the business model is acquiring individual customers who are signed up for, in theory, a 20-year agreement to receive solar credits off of our projects. And in many states, there's a low-income customer requirement. So we'll get into that in a moment. It's a challenging customer if we want to talk about a whole group of many diverse individuals as a customer. If it's a customer archetype, it's a challenging customer to reach educate, and build trust with. So those are 6 that we work with. Anything you think I've missed? Any other ways, levers for community engagement that you all maybe have worked with or thought about? Yeah.
I mean, it's all kind of under this, but like just straight up education on how the grid works and like what the current space is for the current community, because there's 50 states and many communities that all operate very differently.
Yes.
And then, all of the various benefits. Like, I feel it's missing in the whole industry.
Yeah.
So for all of you that want to educate, like, fundamentals.
Yeah. And
So sometimes coming in with all the different parts, it's really hard if you don't understand the whole grid.
Definitely, and there's a lot of misconceptions about the solar industry in particular. There was actually a great Planet Money episode recently about the sort of dark side of residential solar. That has really affected our work in community solar because people have distrust of that part of the industry and therefore don't trust our part of the industry. So I know there's someone who worked in media before. I know someone here is at Heat Map. I think these are things that the media can really work on, is educating consumers, and not just Yale consumers of media, but people in all different communities around the country. I'll take one more if anyone has another thought.
Utilities.
Yeah, thank you for saying that.
They're all demonized. So how do we create that loving space?
Yeah.
Very obvious area.
Yeah. Great.
But besides your representatives, do you have like trusted messengers that the communities interact with better?
Yes, I'm going to get into that. I'm really glad you brought that up. That's sort of how we've thought to begin cracking this, especially customer acquisition piece. Take one more. Yeah.
I know you talked about the financial benefits for the individual landowners, but also the financial benefits to the towns and the districts, the increased tax base.
Yes.
That then a lot of times maybe in rural areas they have a certain political leaning and they want less taxes anyway, so this can complement their tax base.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Awesome. Okay, so again, a lot of text on the slide. Don't feel you need to read it. I will talk through it. But thinking about what we're doing at Dimension for some of these levers. So going back to customer acquisition, the big challenge is the number of customers that we need to acquire. I should add that I have a team of 2. It's me and an analyst on our business development team who are really leading on this charge. We need to enroll over 8,000 households within the next 12 months in New Jersey specifically. That state has a 51% or more low to moderate income customer requirement, and we have financing milestones for these customer acquisition targets. So at this state of construction, this point in construction, we'll draw from our financing facility, and we need to show we have the project X% subscribed. So there's a timeline for this. Other parts of the challenge, as you've sort of alluded to, we need to build trust with communities because community solar is a new offering and a lot of people think it's too good to be true. We've sort of begun to realize that couching it as a state program begins to help people see, okay, this is why it's too good to be true. It was actually designed to be like this, but I hear this every new conversation I have, like, what's the catch? Isn't this too good to be true? As I mentioned, LMI communities around the country have really been burned by solar. I was in the Central Valley of California a lot last year, and everyone had a story about an aunt or a cousin or themselves who had been persuaded to sign up for a rooftop solar system, signed a 20-year PPA and signed it in English when their primary language was Spanish, and ended up putting a lien on their home when they couldn't pay for that lease. So there's a lot of reasons for people to distrust this industry, and we have to find ways to overcome that. And then finally, this industry, the community solar industry, has a lot of what we call subscriber aggregators. They're customer enrollment companies, essentially. There's a lot of them out there. They're tech platforms and then teams of sort of door-to-door salespeople who sign people up for community solar. What we found in the pilot years of projects in New Jersey where we needed to get 1,500 customers, they went door-to-door, they signed people up. But because of the nature of community solar, where you're signing customers up before the projects come online, people often have to wait for their discount to begin coming in. And that dual bill issue that I mentioned, a lot of people churned off the project before it had even been energized. So and feedback we've begun hearing in New Jersey is, well, I didn't see any discount. I thought it was a scam. I canceled. Or, yeah, I was getting 2 bills. Yeah, this is definitely a scam. Like, I'm going to cancel right away. So we have to combat all of this, distrust and sort of the realities of the community solar business model to actually make it work for the people who could benefit the most. In New Jersey, the baseline discount for a project is 20%. That ends up being about $250 a year for the average household in New Jersey, which for a low-income household, for any household at this point, but especially a low-income household, that's a couple tanks of gas, that's school supplies, that's Christmas gifts for your kids. Every organization we're working with, we're hearing what people are excited to use this money on, and it's significant. So our hypothesis, again, to your point, was working with trusted local institutions that already sign people up for benefits that allow them to save money or access state programs would be really good partners for customer education and acquisition ultimately, and get us good customers who don't churn off of our projects, because that's a problem for us. We also thought that instead of spending our customer acquisition budget on, a for-profit tech platform that does this door-to-door outreach, our dollars could be much better and more, deeply impactful invested in local community-based organizations. So we have built a bench of partners in New Jersey. This is just a few of them. Been on New Jersey Transit a lot, going out and running trainings with them. We ran basically a grant proposal process, since most of these partners are nonprofits, and that's the format that they're familiar with. We've tried to make it as light touch as possible because a lot of nonprofits spend way too much time applying for funding, but we wanted to have some sort of arrangement where the organization also had skin in the game and wanted to, show that they really, really wanted to be doing this work and that they understood what would be involved. So from that RFP, we called it a call for community solar enrollment partners. We've selected, beyond the list here, a few others. Many of them are community action agencies, which is a type of organization, came out of the war on poverty in the 60s and 70s. They've been around now for over 50, 60 years, and they're typically poverty alleviation organizations that receive a lot of funds from the federal government and state governments to provide benefits like utilities assistance, housing assistance, help folks sign up for health insurance. So they seem to be, so far, a really good fit for adding community solar into their list of benefits they offer their clients. So what's the impact to these organizations? One, many of these are mission-driven organizations, so they want to be offering additional benefits to their clients. But beyond that, we know they need funding to do their work, so we provide them an upfront grant to kickstart their enrollment campaigns, get their team trained, sometimes even hire in person. And then for every enrollment that they get that is validated by the utility, we provide them a per enrollment fee, and then we'll be providing them an ongoing annual fee for every customer who stays enrolled on that project over the lifetime of the project. So for each of these organizations, it's a blend of upfront, annual, and in the moment funding for each enrollment that comes through. We're also investing a lot in their team, so building their own capacity to sign people up for this benefit, to talk about solar. My bigger picture goal, we're early days here, but is to have sort of an annual gathering of all of these partners who are doing this work where they can exchange best practices, talk about the industry, maybe provide some sort of professional development, so to speak, to help them understand the energy ecosystem in their state. And for us, again, going back to the fact that we're a private equity-backed company, this gives us more certainty in the bench of customers, good customers that we'll be able to acquire on our timelines. There are also better and possibly less expensive customer acquisition channels, depending on how it goes. And we get the policy benefit of being able to point to local investment. So I lead with the front part, but the bottom lines here, the impact to dimension, are how I was able to push this new way of acquiring customers through. Which I think for anyone in the room who's working at a for-profit institution, you can't just do it because it is the right thing to do. There's got to be that other reason. This is a case study. I think I will maybe breeze through, but just to show, this was sort of the idea that pushed us to doing what we're doing in New Jersey. We have a partner in Virginia, an affordable housing provider. We've signed up around 750 customers through them over the last year, which is a pretty good run rate where we think there's ways we can improve and encourage more people to sign up. But that's allowed us to direct over $150,000 in just grant funding to CHP, and then they'll have these ongoing payments for every customer who stays on the project. So wanted to share that we have done this. It seems to be working in another state. New Jersey is earlier days, but we're seeing really, really good results so far from the last 3 months of enrollment campaigns.
What you've done is given the industry, it makes some sense, but I guess my only quandary is we're going to fight climate change. That's just not efficiently spent money eventually. And I'm wondering, could you do something like community choice aggregation and get the whole community to sign up and then go from there? And it'd probably be a heck of a lot cheaper.
That's a great idea. We do work with CCAs in California, but it depends on, New Jersey doesn't have those.
Well, I understand there may have to
thought.
be policy changes. You got your policy team working because, you know, if you sign up a whole city or town, or especially you went to a low income area and just say, we grabbed this one town, guess what? We just met our LMI.
Yeah, I would love that scenario. The reality is that the trust building, I think that hopefully in a year or maybe even 18 months, we could get to the point where we can point to our success with these community partners and how many of their clients they've signed up and be able to go to the next town over, or say the city of Newark, which has a really strong sustainability focus, obviously a big low income population, and say, look at what we've done, you know, what can we structure?
You're also citing them in the communities?
We are. So in New Jersey, all of our projects are on warehouse rooftops. So different from the rest of the country where we're siting on typically fallowing farm fields, et cetera. New Jersey requires that projects are sited on warehouse roofs or brownfields.
But
and so Dimension does just
the additional tax benefit.
I'm sorry?
You get the extra 10% for being a low energy starved community.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to speak to the CCA point. I work with a company called Dual Community Power in New York. We basically built the CCA program in New York, and it's electricity supply, but we've been trying to do opt-out community solar, and the Public Service Commission initially approved that on a pilot basis, the New York PSC, and then they kind of stopped it. So we've been doing it on an opt-in basis, but if you can do it opt-out, you can like move the whole town over, and it's really a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Opt-in's more challenging, but it still, I think, makes sense in some sort of way.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that campaign towards the end. I'll take one more and then I want to get to workforce development.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, so I'll let you
Okay,
go.
perfect. Let's keep going and then I'll come back to your question if you don't mind. So another lever that we talked about was job development. This is, you know, going back to the landscape of clean energy development now. Most state and federal funding requirements involve something related to green jobs training. And I will say there's great headlines about this and great headlines about what the need is, and no one has figured out how to do this in a good way yet. I say that after banging my head against the wall for the last 16 months, figuring out how we can take someone from no understanding of the industry, with an industry that is up and down. You know, the solar coaster is a phrase I had never heard before entering the industry, but it's real because it's a policy and regulatory driven industry. So how do we get more people into this industry, which is growing, into the range of roles that are required to make the clean energy transition happen fast, while also recognizing the challenges that a lot of people from low income or underrepresented communities might have to getting to a job training on time, completing that job training, taking time out of their, you know, maybe minimum wage job in order to get that next level of training, and then making sure that they have a job waiting for them at the end. These are all things that are really hard, and there are organizations that are explicitly structured to do this. Really great workforce development boards, really great clean energy training centers popping up around the country. I think this is work that needs to happen in partnership between all different stakeholders. Our hypothesis so far has been that we can, you know, meet our construction goals and drive long-term job creation by investing in local workforce programs. these programs need to connect participants directly with our construction partners. So we need to have a contract with the people that we're hiring to build our projects that includes a condition of hiring qualified candidates from our training programs. Because of project labor and apprenticeship requirements through the IRA, union and trade organizations need to be part of this somehow. That could be a whole workshop, so I won't get into it too deeply. And then wraparound services really need to be part of this equation. So you need to provide a transportation stipend. You should have some sort of childcare access to encourage more women to enter the space. You might need math or reading remediation at the beginning of the program. These are all things that are part of our hypothesis, and to be very honest, we haven't cracked entirely. But we do have, and let's see where, we have had one, I would say, very successful training in California in the Central Valley with a great organization, sort of the baseline standard out there called Grid Alternatives. They're really focused on pulling folks from farm working communities into the clean energy industry. The Central Valley is set to have the most solar of anywhere in California, just given the amount of land that is there, the amount of farmland that is fallowing because of water issues. There's a lot of work going on in the Central Valley as a sidebar to make sure that development and that transition really serves these communities where every other industry has been very extractive, and that's what Grid Alternatives is part of. So when we were building 3 projects in the Central Valley through the California DAC program, we sponsored 3 5-week trainings, and we made sure that our construction partners had committed to hiring at least 3 people each from this training program. These are both union construction companies and electrical companies, so when the graduates of these programs entered their workforce, they were put up for union membership, which is very hard to get into typically. So this was sort of a pathway to middle class and more wages for these graduates. And 6 trainees worked on our projects, 5 continued on with our union contractors. Success for those 5, I still look at these numbers and think like, it's not that many people. But if I can encourage folks who are still trying to figure out where to get involved in this industry, I think workforce development is a really, really challenging one that we need more people working on. Go for it, yeah.
I was just going to ask if you see any kind of overlap or opportunities to combine the customer acquisition with the workforce development.
Yeah.
Getting communities excited about the jobs aspect in addition to the bill credits?
Yes, so far we haven't had enrollment on projects line up with the timing of our trainings, but we're actually just about to do a campaign with a community college in South Jersey that's 2 miles away from one of our biggest projects there. The goal will be to get everyone in that training program signed up and have a referral code for them to refer friends and family. It still feels small scale, but if we could get a whole community college to sign up for one of our projects, that would be great. What I've found is that community college staff are typically overworked and underpaid, and so it's sometimes hard to add on initiatives. But when we find the right partner or figure out the right incentive, I think there could be something very impactful there. All right, why don't we take a question, and can I have a time check? I feel I'm a little bit.
You guys.
Oh, great, okay, this is actually not as bad as I thought. Any questions on this workforce development piece, comments, thoughts on how to connect the dots a little bit better? Yeah.
I'm just a little curious, it sounds like Dimension has done this sort of internally, seeing a lot of the value in this, but how can funders who may be working with less socially motivated or less sort of socially aware developers push developers to have programs like this or consider programs like this or take a first step?
Yeah, and when you say funders, what type of capital?
Like project finance capital or even pre-development capital.
Oh, that's interesting.
Pre-development is probably harder.
I would love it if our project finance team came to me and said that our banks were asking for this. It would give me a lot more funding to work with, probably. How could you do that? I mean, I think as the provider of funding, you have a lot of leverage. Like, the developers need your funding to do what they're doing. So I would suggest starting with a small sort of requirement. So maybe it's a initial donation or pointing to a local organization that they could work with for workforce development. And I would pick one topic to have them have to focus on. I think if you're especially working with smaller developers that don't have large teams, this is a new capacity and capability to build. But I love that you're thinking about that, and I'd love to talk with you more after the session. You had a question earlier, yeah.
Yeah, I just was wondering, are you planning in the future to branch out to Connecticut?
So Connecticut has a very small community solar program. For the scale that Dimension is working at, it's too small for us, unfortunately. So the answer is no for Dimension.
I'm curious, not being super attuned to the workforce side of this, is there currently an undersupply of general labor when it comes to like installation? So there's incentive to bring in people even if they're like traditionally underrepresented and it takes some more work?
Yes, there is. This has been the sort of break my brain part of this whole equation. We hear this from all of our EPC construction partners. They don't have enough entry-level talent, or they have it, they leave, people don't show up to work on time. But lining that need up with when a training program ends, and there's sort of a golden window to place someone in those jobs is the tricky part.
Yeah, I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper on the conversation with your union contractors.
Yeah.
And, how receptive were they to working with you directly with the grid alternative program, and how did you approach that conversation with them?
Yeah, so I actually was not at Dimension when the negotiations happened, but I was there when the implementation happened. And from what I understand, we already had signed the EPC contract with them, so they knew they had the work with us. Grid Alternatives also, our funding sort of passed through Grid Alternatives to pay the salary of these trainees while they were working on our projects. So that sort of mitigated, I think, some of the risk for our construction partners and allowed them to say, okay, we'll take a chance. This is like sort of free training or apprenticeship for these folks. And then when 5 out of 6 did a great job, they were comfortable bringing them on full time. Cool. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving because we have a full case study to dig into. So I guess a question I wanted to pose to the group is, and this is something that I've felt very strongly, is there are a lot of tensions in this space. If you're a private, for-profit developer with big banks lending you money, you're working on a particular timeline and you're working with particular hurdle rates. And I'm curious if you all have thoughts or just would be interested in sharing what you see as some of the tensions in community engagement for project development or whatever your realm of expertise might be. Go for it.
So I just, I come from the grid side, really just the naive analyst that would build models, run studies, and communicate what the grid can and cannot handle from transmission and distribution. And so as I grew in the utility space and was being asked to engage the community, I would just say it's nothing that we're taught, especially in all of our curriculum and education.
Yeah.
And I think it's a huge gap because of the ideas of us as humans being active listeners and the realization that all people are coming from so many perspectives. And then here comes your big angry utility that wants to do something that actually is truly modernized, new, and advanced, but they can't do it without that community engagement. And I guess the tensions are just complete mistrust between the establishment and the individuals. So the whole transmission queue, not my backyard, the whole queue is clogged because we can't build transmission, and mostly that will come down to community engagements where the utilities and the developers and everything come and have a meeting like this with 20 people that represent, a community of 10,000.
Yeah.
And it's their voices that ultimately could stop a project that's needed, such as a goat farm under a line. So there's so many stories, but I think it's really how do we teach the next generation of minds the importance of what it means to have true conversation and start to really learn from all parts of the system. The tension is very strong. And the many community meetings that I've had, there's like 1 or 2 people that will drive a whole to the ground.
I'm thinking of that book, Superpower. I don't know if anyone's read that book.
And you have no idea how they gain the power, but they have the power. And then you're like, well, how do I work with that power?
Yeah.
How do we work together?
Yeah.
And then all of your energy is like focused on a very small set. And
Yeah.
is that how it should be? So.
Yeah, yeah. Has anyone had a community engagement meeting that has gone better than expected, or that has sort of flipped? You know, maybe it started off poorly and then something worked.
Yeah, there's many of those too.
That's good. That's good to hear. That's heartening. Yeah, go for it.
I don't want to speak for all developers, but maybe I will and say there's generally a sentiment that if you just spend more money, you can fix community engagement. And I think inherently you can't buy trust. So the dollars need to be spent building trust, not buying trust.
Yes.
Right.
And
I don't know if that model has really made it to most of, especially the grid scale developers that I interact with.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I think something that I have felt working with a relatively small budget is actually that my time is the limiting factor and my team's time is the limiting factor. Like taking the time to go, you can't do community engagement by Zoom. It's also not feasible for me as one person to fly to the Central Valley every week for 6 months. And I think that, hindered some processes for us, for example. So yeah, I almost wonder if to ask for developers is like invest your community engagement spend in people first in a salary and then move to some of these grant initiatives or, financial investments beyond that. Yeah.
Well, you showed a couple of slides earlier with partnering with local communities, community organizations. As community organizers, we recognize that you can't parachute yourself into a community.
Yeah.
But by the same token, what you just said, you have to spend money
Yeah.
on this, and
No,
you seem reluctant, or your company seem, the way you phrased it, and I don't mean you personally, but the way you phrased it is that, well, we don't have the resources to spend on that. But isn't that the whole point of community engagement?
Yeah.
Is to be able to spend money to, I hate to use this word, but influence, and to educate the people who you're trying to help. And beyond that is, how do you, EJ communities have always been marginalized because they have the worst projects on there for generations. So how do you overcome that whole idea? Even though your projects are clean, how do you overcome that stigma of, oh, here comes the big back developer, millions of dollars, but you don't want to spend $100,000 on working on community engagement? And I'm not directing this at you.
No, I hear everything
the whole
you're
industry
saying.
that we see, and it's problematic. Nobody trusts anybody, and all right, I'll say it's a capitalist system that doesn't really want to work on this, and it's frustrating. And I'll stop.
No, I hear everything you're saying.
It does come
Sorry.
down, it's like sadly with all of the altruistic meaning, and then you get in a room and someone says follow the money. And so it's really hard to swallow that, because until it's something that someone can profit off of or become the next big shining star or the new technology that'll transform and become the thing that ships us to the moon, who knows? That's where their aspirations are. And you can't get the
But I'm not naive about this. I get it. I know
I'm
what
just
we're
saying,
working
how
with,
do we?
but-
That's the
I think
that is the big
questions are how do
solution.
we incentivize, because there is a profit motive at all of this, incentivize developers to spend more money and invest in their teams and people and in the education of those people.
Can I just add one thing to that too? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying the IIJ funding and the IRA funding, everyone poo-poos or push-posh or what, the amount of effort that they're driving for this exact thing is there and present. And there's a transformation happening in every boardroom, in every corporation that's what's this engagement thing and how does it impact our energy justice systems? And so it seems obvious to a lot of us, but I also feel like there is a lot of language in there that's really helpful.
And I
It's a new industry, so it should be a new paradigm.
Yes, and I think that requires education, and this is the last thing I'll say on this for now before we move forward, but I think this is where it all comes back to education, right? And it comes back to how much is a company able to invest in their team to go to places they've never been before and understand the reality in an environmental justice community, for example, where everyone has asthma or everyone is, knows someone who has cancer, or doing a really uncomfortable workshop around conflict resolution. I know there's more people on my team or at other developers who would find that really useful. And the idea just hasn't been proposed. Like my teammates on the development team are in very contentious town meetings all the time, and I don't think they've had any training on this. So I think that's a lever for people in decision-making roles at developers to pull is like, what's the training that you're offering to your teams? Okay, I like this thread, so I'm going to stay here. Let's do 2 more comments and then take 5 minutes on the workshop that I had planned.
I have a background in water infrastructure as well as renewables, so I just wonder if there is not some way we can work with groups that bundle all the infrastructure training together or do the EJ training in such a way that each of us is not having to spend a different amount of monies trying to get our specific project going.
That's interesting. So you're thinking about we have a utilities representative or electrical utilities representative
Yeah,
here.
because there is, so much federal funding allocated. It's kind of a shame if you can't get the different buckets from the different agencies to at least bring a variety of jobs at least. Like you could look at a union and see what trades they have that could go into different infrastructure.
Yeah, and think about it at a regional level where the context is the same. I like that. You had a question?
Yeah, I was just a comment about also sort of more from the community perspective is also that, it's like time is important both in a developer needs the time to be able to go to all these different places and have these conversations, but I think it often takes several conversations with the same person. The time dimension is also in that it can't go any faster than it's going to go.
Yeah.
And I think that is often a frustration at first. Is why can't people see? But I've seen that shift before.
Yeah.
But it took months and months and months.
Yes, absolutely.
And sometimes I just keeping that time dimension in mind as well.
Yes, the number one tension that I've seen in this space is the speed of business and financing and the speed of trust building. So I think going back to your question about financing and what levers you have to pull, I don't know if in community solar there's not really this ability. We do need to show our lenders that we have the project subscribed by certain milestones, but where funders can provide a little bit of a longer leeway for XYZ initiatives, I think that is a helpful lever to pull. It's the same way in impact investment, a funder might give a company a little longer to reach a certain revenue target. It just takes time when you're doing something that's hard and involves trust building. This is so much text. I'm regretting my decision here. So I think though this is such a great group and there's been really good discussion. I would like to have a little small group time. This scenario, can everyone read this? If you actually, okay, great. The scenario is this, and I think this gets to a piece of the space we've kind of touched on, which is utilities and state governments and federal governments are incentivizing good community engagement practices by tying funding and tying capacity to these 2 targets. So in this scenario, a utility in California is opening up limited community solar capacity. If you're a community solar developer who submit project plans that include supplier diversity, a focus on supplier diversity. So you are leading community engagement for this developer, or maybe you have another role, but you're tasked with figuring this out, and you have a month to come up with a plan that's going to win you capacity and create meaningful impact. You're not just doing this to win the capacity. Everyone in this room, I can tell, actually cares about creating the impact. So you have 5 projects in Bakersfield County. For folks who haven't been there, it's an oil-producing region of California. It's a mix of the city of Bakersfield and very rural communities. There's been some solar development there, not a ton yet. What's happened there has been mostly utility scale, so that's what people think of when they think of solar. There's a good IBEW in Bakersfield County, so there's strong labor and construction presence there. And you have 2 years after winning these bids to build the project. So I included that to note you have time to kind of work on things. And you have $100,000 per project to allocate to these initiatives in addition to whatever budget you'd be spending on construction. So the cool thing about this sort of scenario is that you actually have your entire, let's say $8 million construction budget for each one of these projects to work with for this initiative. So range of questions, you're not going to get to all of them obviously, but pick 1 or 2. If you're going to this community for the first time, how are you going to identify diverse suppliers? How are you going to make sure they can meet your needs and help you build your project or provide materials or provide porta potties for the construction team? Like, think about suppliers in a very big way. There's a lot of different suppliers for a project like this. How will you incentivize them to join you? If there aren't businesses that you need, how would you develop them with that budget you have? And then if there's anything kind of out of the box, how would you get buy-in internally for these initiatives? So lots of questions. Maybe let's do like each row can kind of huddle for 5 minutes. And then we'll discuss. Sound good? Okay, cool.
How much do you build into the or how much do you build in those type of materials on the grid scale side? You think about like a rural suppliers whatever instead of ground or 100 miles of road, maybe ground. And of course,
It's also just easier for them managing that
We have a lot.
Small shots about that. Yeah, I mean.
The supplier questions were using it especially to identify global suppliers.
Yeah, we'll be interested. I'd love it.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah, is that like, I don't know, like there's everything.
Contracts, insurance.
Yeah, I'm all okay, take 1 more minute to kind of wrap up and then
Just a lot of
Also, right, you're bidding in, like you're bidding in projects. Is there an issue?
all right, coming back. In 5, 4, 3, 2, wow. 1. Wow, that was so awesome, and I'm going to pick on a couple of groups if no one volunteers immediately. But the next session is open networking, so I've been told we can go 5 minutes over. I will stay here as long as people are in this room, but just to give you a sense of our timing. So I would love to hear from groups, what questions did you tackle? What ideas did you come up with? I'm actually going to take notes. And or what questions were lingering for you about this? Maybe let's start with questions that you felt like you answered. Obviously, I have something to say because the room is very loud.
Yeah, we're competitive.
Yeah, go for it.
Our group had a few different ideas, but one thing we talked about was stepping back and before answering these questions, actually talking about the idea of education and actually having it start with communication instead of education. So, doing real outreach and seeing what the community needs are first, as opposed to beginning with education and then trying to incorporate that into kind of like the project pitches to the communities.
Wow, love that. And needs, you mean what sort of needs?
We didn't really get that part, but I mean,
Yeah.
just like they
care about.
Yeah, they care about, and how does that relate to the project that we could be bringing in.
Nuria brought up a good point. She said that we can't assume that like our goals are their goals. So taking a step back, asking what their goals are.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, maybe what are their labor challenges or shortages or economic development needs? Yeah.
And one question we had at the end was what labor requirements will the utility actually require? So is it under a PLA? Usually utilities already have collective bargaining agreements and PLAs that they're operating under.
Yeah, for simple context, union labor in California, project labor agreements typically required.
Yeah, and then the unions are actually, the building trades are fantastic. If that is already in place, then they can actually connect you with diverse suppliers as well.
Yeah, right, all those certifications are in place. They have their member organizations. That would be an easy path, definitely. Yeah.
We were wondering if the 1 month is even enough time to hit all those goals, right?
Yeah, no, it's not. But I can tell you from experience.
I'm glad you answered our question.
It's not enough time to do the best possible job, but it's sometimes the time that you have from when these RFOs open and when they're due to put together something. So maybe part of what you're putting in there is like, we plan these community, meetings or stakeholder meetings, like this is months 1 to 3 after winning the bid, and then, or month 1 through 6, probably more time is better. But yeah, 1 month is not, sadly, often what we have to work with.
How do we change that?
Utilities and state and federal, like I'm thinking about an Illinois program. It gives you 6 months to develop a plan for community-driven community solar projects. 6 months is okay. Unfortunately, sometimes you don't learn about those programs or you don't have a project that's ready to apply until 3 months before. So time is always the issue.
I think the 1 month doesn't come from the utilities. We would love more time.
No.
I think they're like made up,
this is a made up scenario in part 2.
But usually if there's like a funding opportunity or like someone's like trying to fund something, that's usually coming from the grant givers, and then it's dropped.
Yeah, which might be the state,
right?
For example, and states are okay.
No, like I was saying, like you almost have to have your like tentacles out there.
Yeah.
Network to know when these things are going to drop, and then do all of this due diligence and have everything sitting on the shelf, so when it's dropped you're ready. And so it's all about having networked and already engaged.
Yeah,
like I call it the Avenger Squad. Like you're going to need like 6 or 7 partnerships to effectively meet this. And yes, the utility is typically one of it, but
that's a great point. You have got to be always on.
Right.
Like
so
you
then
have to
how
have
do
the
you
team.
incentivize folks to volunteer their time and craft all this language and create all these documents? And ultimately a lot of it can be done and sit on the shelf. And that was really the strategy I took, is like I just told everyone we're gonna have like 12 different concepts and executed projects. So when it dropped, I'd be like, you go. So you don't wait for it to drop. You already have to have it ready.
You're ready. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So, and this, we had a general conversation, but, and I guess it's back to you. So when I'm looking at all this stuff, I must admit, I think the program's just flawed from the get-go, the way it was created, right? I mean, is this about fighting climate change, or is this about taking care of low-income neighborhoods? And what policymakers have done is they've pushed both together, and you have the worst of both possible worlds. We're going to make it really expensive to fight climate change, and we're really not helping low-income communities. If we go a half mile from here to a low-income community, and you say to them, "Hi, I'm here to save you. Want to sign up for solar?" They're looking at you. My windows are leaky. I have lead paint. I've got all kinds of other things going on that have to be taken care of first with their houses, with them. That is a low-income project. If you talk about you want to help bring solar on that makes sense to do it in a bigger community scale, that's running down to Fairfield County, the people that are willing to pay for it. And, so to me, I guess backing up, is going back to your policy people and trade associations and saying, we got the program wrong. Now, maybe it's an opportunity in Connecticut, since we haven't done much of anything. Maybe we can get the program right and you can replicate it around the country. But to me, you're just faced with then, explaining this thing. It's very difficult because your savings is only, in Connecticut, only 40% of the cost now is on supply.